Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So I started off with the presentation. I sort of wrote the title slide first and then thought, okay, I now need to do some research into actually supporting this topic. So provocatively putting this point out there, will salary and payroll as it exists today be the same in 2025? If we think about innovation and what's happening and what's going on, then depending on your perspective, you'll either go, well, actually, no, it's going to be pretty much the same, or no, it'll be radically different. I take the view that it'll be radically different, and I'll just sort of back that up as we go through the course of the presentation, why I think that's the case. So let's just go back in time. I was curious for quite a long time as to what is really the origin of pay and benefits, payroll. Where did it come from, as we know it today? So I dug back through the history books, and obviously courtesy of all the materials online. And, we could go back into the ancient times and find, archaeologists have found that there was some evidence of early stage pay slips, if you call it like that, found chiseled into stone tablets. But obviously that was quite a long time ago. But I did some further research, and actually the real modern transformational beginning of payroll as we know it today started around the 15th century as a result of work by this gentleman who probably should have a lot of recognition in the business world but is not that widely known. So let me introduce Luca Pacioli. He, in the late 1400s, in Italy, at a time when there was a big renaissance taking place, where big, expansive ideas were being discussed, new concepts were being talked about, this sort of mixing together of mathematics, science, religion, and just bigger world thinking was taking place. So Luca Pacioli published a book. The abbreviated version, because my Italian is not good enough to cover the whole one, is the Summa de Arithmetica. So, and essentially inside this book was a new radical concept about how businesses could actually track and control, not only how they were paying for goods, but also how they were paying people to do work for them. And this is really the genesis of a massive innovation that took place 500 plus years ago. So, and the other interesting thing is that in the circle that Luca was working in at that time were also some other luminary individuals. So he worked with Leonardo da Vinci. He also published this book on one of the first printing presses, the Gutenberg press. So this was like a peak moment in European history of innovation, right? Big, bold ideas were being explored and communicated. And obviously whatever age we're in, whether it's today or 500 years ago, innovation really needs a few things to happen, right? You need a big, bold, brave idea, something that people can engage with, get excited about, and then we need people to adopt the idea, and then it becomes seen as a mainstream transformation. So let's look a little bit at his contribution. So in that time, the Italian families especially were quite legendary and, taking quite a leadership position in terms of trading and doing business with people, around the world. And after this book was published, then some prominent business leaders, families, actually, learned about this book and started to get interested in actually applying these concepts. They were completely radical new concepts. So, thinking about debits and credits, income and expenditure, earnings and deductions, those principles of accounting all came from this book, right? And it's amazing to think that 500 years later, we're still largely running and following those exact same principles, right? They've stayed true through the test of time, and it's quite interesting. Even with the advent of technology, blockchains, distributed ledgers, still at the heart of all of that stuff is the principle of income, outgoings, earnings, deductions, right? The debits, credits. So that sort of stayed and then was used really through this period which is referred to as the commercial revolution. So for a few hundred years after, business was still quite small scale in these days, not like the sort of companies that we have today, nothing on that sort of scale. But these principles were adopted and used and spread eventually throughout the world. And then obviously we reached the period of the Industrial Revolution, which is really the first moment in history of innovation where the size of companies suddenly started to reach huge scale, right? So we started a new era. There were lots of innovations and inventions and demand for products, goods and services worldwide. And also then the factories became quite large. But still, people were largely getting paid at the end of a piece of work, whether that's a piecework, I've done something and I get paid for it, or whether it was the end of a day. That was still the key notion, right? So, because it's always been curious, where did the monthly pay cycle and benefit cycle come from? It's always been interesting to me. But it really started then, because these companies were simply unable to handle the volume, right? So it's still largely a cash-based world. There were no credit cards or modern mechanisms available. That was quite a big overhead for companies to actually manage. But these are the sort of the genesis, the roots of innovation that followed. So if we sort of keep that context in mind and then fast forward and see what's been happening in recent times, that sort of still builds on the concepts that were created 500 years ago. You've probably seen slides like this before, talking about the pace of change and how things are accelerating, right? So as we move from things that are in the analog world towards digital things, we can see the adoption time to get large numbers of people using these various innovations is actually dropping quite dramatically, right? You can see that on that chart, and that sort of, I think, makes that point quite clearly. And, I suppose I spent a couple of decades working mostly in financial services institutions, banks, all around the world, and ended up getting involved in, what is now referred to as digital innovation. Prior to that, it was online. But essentially, it's the same trends are actually taking place here, right? So people are getting access to services more easily. They're getting access to financial services more easily, and payroll benefits. Sort of, we might think that sort of exists over there and is somehow protected from these other influences, but actually it isn't. I used to work in the banking sector quite extensively, and 10 years ago, I would say that me and my colleagues inside banks were sort of slightly dismissive of so-called fintechs. We took the view that nobody will trust these guys with money. It never work. It'll be a disaster. People have got a strong, connection to their bank. They trust those brands, and that was the view. And then I suppose about 5 years ago, when the reality started to dawn on us in the banking world, that actually this wasn't the case. Consumers were flocking to innovative digital ways of accessing and managing their money, their pay, and everything that goes along with that, living their lives digitally. In the last 5 years, in the UK alone, 5 major fintechs have managed to attract in the region of 10 million individuals to use their services, right? We never thought that would happen as, classical bankers, and then we realized actually it was happening, this innovation was gripping, and therefore we have to actually join in. So then we started, I used to work at Barclays, We started to develop closer relationships with the innovators in the fintech space, accelerators, incubators, build partnerships. We were sort of partly still thinking, actually, it's not really going to continue, and we'll just sort of get close to them, figure out how they do this, and we actually tried to copy some of the ways of working that some of these fintech competitors were using. So we ripped out large swathes of traditional office space, refitted it with some of the most expensive unvarnished wood that you could possibly buy, and you know, we started to work in an agile way, and we were sort of trying to be funky, and then you realise actually there's something more fundamental going on there. It's more than just a physical thing. It's more than just a brand thing, because actually at the end of the day, the driver, the demand is coming from the consumers, from the people. It's their money. They want to manage their money in the way they want to manage it today. So, you know, if we look at what's happening, you know, this chart is showing the number of people that are, you know, using smartphones. I think it would be probably fair to say that nearly 100%, if not 100% of everybody in the room is also, like most of us, locked onto and dedicated to our smartphones. And that trend is nearly a worldwide thing. Obviously, in some emerging, evolving markets, it's not quite at that level of penetration yet, but it's definitely coming. And, you know, my view on innovation is that actually it's the collision of and coming together of, convergence of a number of things. It's never just one thing in and of itself. It's a number of factors, right, around behavior, technology, access, information, etc. And we can see, again, in the world of, you know, payroll, benefits, work, you know, and in banking, you know, we have moved from, you know, physical cash to digital forms, and then we've got now even further advanced digital forms of cash, you know, crypto, cryptographical-based currencies. You know, we'll have heard of Bitcoin, we'll have heard of the initiatives that Facebook are taking with the Libra coin once they get through, which I'm sure they will, through all the regulatory barriers being put in front of them. But there's a pace of change taking place here, right? And that is really being driven from people wanting to control how they use their money, what they use it for, right? And I think this is especially relevant to those of us in the room working in this sort of space that we're in. So, you know, I think money is pay, money is a benefit, all changing forever. I think it's unstoppable. The question is, what could we do about it to help and enable people in our world? So just changing sort of gears a little bit. So if we think about Luca Pacioli, so he was a pioneer, right? He was the person that came out with a groundbreaking idea, and then other people liked it, were attracted to it, then followed, right? So the leader and then followers. It was groundbreaking at the time, and I think similarly we can see whether you love them or hate them. You know, the Uber model, or the Uberization of the workforce, if you permit me to describe it in that way, is likely also to result in a change in how we do things. The change in the way the workforce gets work, and the change in the way the workforce gets paid, and then the change in the way that the workforce receives certain benefits for their contribution to companies. So, you know, if you look at you know, Uber, I've sort of described the 100 million plus people that use Uber as the employers in this new business model, and the drivers, you know, 4 million or so, increasing 30% a year as really the employees in a new workforce, right? So undoubtedly, big companies, small companies are going to follow similar models, right, in terms of how people get engaged, how they get their work, right? I was just talking last week to an executive in a major UK employer, a huge one, and he was actually talking to me about they're interested in actually creating an Uber model for the deployment of their workforce to give people their assignments effectively. Today you might be doing this role, tomorrow we'd like you to do that role because, reaching a certain size, you need to get to a certain level of efficiency as well. And also people have to be able to do multiple things. So, and that was like not a tech company. It was a traditional business, large, well-known brand name. And they're actively already thinking about this sort of thing. So you can see that, where these leaders bring new business models to the table, new innovative business models, then others will follow and try and take on board those concepts, just as happened with the accounting concepts that Luca Pacioli brought to the market. So I think in terms of the, where is this all heading, I think pay as we know it, the traditional way of getting paid, monthly cycles, structured ways of receiving money, getting assignments, receiving benefits, paying for benefits, I think that's going to be significantly under attack. Not in a bad way, but actually in a good way, because we'll be responding to the needs of the valued employees and the workforce that we have. And I'd sort of characterize it in this way, that, we're moving from, as we've seen in other areas, right? If we think about the changes that took place in terms of pension, moving from defined benefits to defined contributions, obviously the various drivers as to why that was a thing. But if you look more broadly at what's actually happening in how people access their money, get assignments, do work, we are moving from this sort of centralized, where the employers largely decide, I think, to a more flexible model where, on this side, the employees will have much more of a say in terms of the work they do, the benefits they receive, how they want to receive their pay, when they want to receive their pay. So while I'm not here today to talk about Neyber specific solutions for this, we are actively working to devise some really big and bold new ideas. That's why I joined the business at the beginning of the year. But really, I like to look at what's actually going on in society. What are the trends? What are the shifts? Right? What are the changes in behaviour and habits? And how can we then respond to those? Rather than coming up with new products and pushing product solutions into the market, actually how do we solve and support the needs of people to work and get paid in the way that they want to? And then I think there's further backdrop here as well. So I think we can see that the so-called gig economy, there is a rise in terms of that, people working either part-time, variable hours, or for multiple employers. That's a reality. I think is likely to increase. I think in terms of financial well-being, there's a lot of material information, great content, education out there. Potentially too much. How do we actually think about how do we give people and equip people with the knowledge or the ability to take action of what they need, rather than expecting somebody to study? Because clearly in this busy, hectic world that we're all living in, right, everyone's super overloaded, super busy across many different sectors, busy lives, that sort of busyness factor has increased substantially in how we live today. How in that sort of noisy world can we possibly expect people to sit down calmly and study and learn and read and then figure out how to apply, right? Some will, but some won't know how to, and some won't have the time or the remit or the possibility to do so. So I think the new technology, the new innovation that we need to bring to the marketplace is around actually helping people to take action, right? And in some cases that will require leaning on the machines, leaning on the data, leaning on understanding people's needs in a true individual sense, not stereotypically putting people into certain categories, which rarely works because everybody's got individual needs, right? So, but we've got now the possibility, because of advances in technology, we've got the possibility, possibly for the first time in a long time, to actually understand people at an individual level and then develop personalized solutions and plans for those individuals, right? So I think it's a really exciting time for us in the room to be creating, new solutions. I think, the fintechs are clearly going to continue, and just as they have attacked and disrupted, the financial services sector as a core, then clearly this is going to, also start to impact employment and benefits and reward and all the good things that we care about. And I think, the notion of a mobile workforce as well. We can see not only in terms of gig economy jobs and roles, but also in terms of as we move to a more and more advanced, sort of use of technology-based roles that roles that can be literally done anywhere, even roles that can be done on a mobile phone as the new type of work. Again, I think we need to adapt and then adopt, the solutions and services that we have. So, thank you very much. And if we've got any time for questions, not sure we have. I've probably gone over. But yeah, thank you very much. It's been great talking to you.